Hello, hello, and welcome everyone to another In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter, and with me, as always, is Ansgar Odinson.
Hey, everybody.
And thank you very much for joining us. Sort of a follow-up to yesterday. It was interesting. Yesterday was a breaking news story that we had prepared for all day. we're pretty sure what's going to happen.
It seems a little disingenuous, but I mean, what are you going to do? When you know what's going to happen, you know what's going to happen, you know?
Well, we're sitting there, we got the graphics, we're doing the graphics for a breaking news story before it breaks, but we're like, it's not a planned show, but on the flip side, we know how it's going to end.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, So I thank you all very much for joining us. We are going to be bringing out Landon Noll in a little while, and he's going to discuss his experience with impeachment. He has actually gone through the process and actually impeached someone and successfully had them removed from office. So it's good to be able to have on someone who's got that kind of experience. We also are going to have on Tuesday, which is Christmas Eve, at 2 p.m., our usually scheduled program. We're going to have Osmandius Ramses II to discuss, do we still need philosophy? And he's a favorite of mine. I love hanging out with that guy and chatting with him, so it's going to be fun to have him on. And for those of you who we're going to be, next month is coming up. It was the first Wednesday. We may have to move it because of how we've altered our schedule, but ostensibly the first Wednesday, sometime the first week of every month, our Patreon Hangouts. We hope you will join us for that. If you're not a patron yet, there is a easy way to fix that problem. But we do really enjoy speaking with our patrons, and we do borrow, steal, rewrite, snag all our ideas from our patrons.
Just a few.
We have a couple of our own ideas, but not many. Yeah, no.
I mean, like our last scheduled show that we had was definitely directly from our patrons.
You mean directly from us?
Right.
From,
exactly.
I don't know what
the patrons told us they really liked it, and so that's why we went ahead with the idea that totally was not theirs.
Exactly.
Right.
We are Patreon driven. We don't have sponsors. We don't, we haven't been doing any of that. We just go entirely by Patreon. Super chats too, if you want to put in a super chat. We are going to, after the show too, Landon, I'm hoping, actually, I don't know if we ran this by him, so this may be coming out a bit from left field. We'd like to have him come into our Discord a bit, and people who want to talk to him in person, we will be doing kind of an after show or an after party in the Discord afterwards. So I hope you guys will join us for that, and we will have the moderators will drop that link in the live chat. Am I missing anything?
No, we also do have Richard Carrier coming up, which is on our upcoming little calendar thing too, which that is going to be a really interesting. We got two pretty heavy topics coming up. One, do we need philosophy? We haven't had a really heavy philosophy topic, so I'm looking forward to that. And did Jesus exist? I mean, that's going to be a really interesting topic. I'm psyched for that.
And even he admits, because he's very good at philosophy. He's got a degree in ancient history, and even he admits that the evidence, as it is viewed today, is that he was a real person, not necessarily the son of God, but that he was in fact a real person. He argues no, and he has a book in which he makes the argument, and he admits he has the burden of proof, since it is currently accepted that Jesus did exist. He says he meets it. I haven't heard this argument or what he's got to say yet, but I am looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too.
So we'll cover the Hitchens argument, which I actually also really like, which is lies in the Bible actually demonstrate that Jesus must have existed. That's an interesting argument for another time.
Yeah.
We had an interesting thing came out. There's been a couple of Trump has been in the news just a wee bit in the last.
It's almost like he's been dominating the news cycle for the last little bit.
Well, okay. To be fair, he's only been dominating the news for the last 3 years.
A little bit.
Yeah. Oh God, I really want him off my screen. While we were doing the impeachment breaking news yesterday. Oh, and I did miss one thing, which is we also have, normally we have really world-renowned debate coverage. And people are famous. Ansgar. We have world-renowned debate coverage. Only a few of us get drunk and start banging our heads up against like hard objects. But tonight you're going to get 2 for 1.
Coverage.
Debate coverage.
Excuse me.
Ansgar takes our debate coverage very And it's interesting because it really is. It's kind of hard to drag him to those shows. And I noticed he didn't mention that we were missing it today.
Our producer was like, "Should we be covering the debates?" I'm like, "Debates? What debates? I don't know what you're talking about." What special friend did you have that would surprise people and taught you a lesson? Fucking care. These people are potentially going to be the most powerful people in our government, and you're asking who their special friends. Sorry, go ahead. Continue.
There's a fine line between love and contempt. So he it's funny because we do have, and sometimes it goes on for a while, so we just chat and we have a good time. We did it with ProLib, and it's a lot of fun. The shows with ProLib are great. We had them on yesterday with Mikey yesterday. We had a lot of fun. So I think you make the best of it, but it's hilarious because the reaction's always mixed. 50% of our audience sits there and says, "This is not debate coverage, dude. You guys are," and we only, if they say something big, we get into it. But other than that, we're just biding time until. I'm
sorry, I'm not going to offer my riveting commentary about who someone's best friend was in high school.
You really hated that question.
That was the most inane fucking question I have ever heard a politician asked in my life, and they went through every single politician like it was some big important question, and I was waiting. I would have immediately supported any Democrat who said that is the most inane fucking question I've ever been asked, and I refuse to answer it.
But earlier in that same broadcast, you were like, "God, they're going to ask like, who was your best friend?" Like 20 minutes later, that's what and I would remember saying, "Ansgar, it's not that bad, Ansgar," and then poof, that comes up. So half our audience says, this is just not debate coverage. You guys are just kind of making fun of the process. And there is some of that going on too, because we sit there and say, look, there's 20 people. I understand why there has to be a process, but nobody's asking the difficult questions yet. Later on, the debates get bigger and more important. But and then the other half of the debate coverage, or the other half of our audience is like, this is the best debate coverage. Like, you guys are treating this exactly with what it deserves. So what we're going to be doing is when Mr. Noll comes out, we're gonna start talking to him. But we are also monitoring the debates. If anything big comes up, I am curious to see how people are going to discuss the impeachment. I think that may be important. And there's even been a few other little tiny news things. So if anything comes up, we will be breaking to that, and then we'll go right back to the show. And then after the show, we will have our our little Discord party.
Yeah.
So I know Ansgar wanted to say something, and then what I'm going to do right before we go to that, I did want to say this just came out. Christianity Today came out with a op-ed, and the op-ed title is "Trump Should Be Removed from Office." Now, this is considered the biggest evangelical magazine circulation of, I think, about 130,000, if I recall. That's staggering to see in there. This magazine was founded by Billy Graham. The op-ed starts with, in our founding documents, Billy Graham explains that Christianity Today will help evangelical Christians interpret the news in a manner that reflects their faith. Mm-hmm. Let us grant this to the president. The Democrats have had it in for him from day one, and therefore nearly everything he does is under a cloud of suspicion. This has led many to suspect not only motives, but facts in the recent impeachment hearings. And no, Mr. Trump did not have a serious opportunity to offer his side of the story in the House hearings on impeachment. But the facts in this instance are unambiguous. The President of the United States attempted to use his political power to coerce a foreign leader to harass and discredit one of the President's political opponents. That is not only a violation of the Constitution, more importantly, it is profoundly immoral.
Wow,
the reasons we are not The reason many are not shocked by this is because the president has dumbed down the idea of morality in his administration. He has hired and fired a number of people who are now convicted criminals. He himself has admitted to immoral actions in business and relationships with women, about which he remains proud. His Twitter feed alone, with its habitual string of mischaracterizations, lies, and slanders, is nearly a perfect example of a human being who is morally lost and confused.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't
I
think
don't
we'd
know.
see the evangelical right at all abandon Trump.
No, to be fair, it's an op-ed, but the fact is that this
Mm-hmm.
op-ed was allowed to go, and the fact is this is unambiguous.
And this isn't like an
And
op-ed on, let's say, like the New York Times, where they'll let any well-written article, no matter what side it comes from. This is an op-ed in a very clearly this is our mission statement kind of publication.
Indeed, and if I recall, they also later said that he was morally bankrupt. And this is his base. This
Yeah.
is his base. Period. So the fact that this could even come out and that he should be removed from office and that he's in fact guilty is what they're saying is, I think, certainly newsworthy. And so I wanted to lead in with that. But I know in discussing the impeachment, I know that you had some views that you wanted to share, Ansgar. I look forward to hearing what it is you have to say.
So, first of all, I feel incredibly privileged to be working on this show with you, Nick. And I know we joke around and give each other a lot of hell, but truly, I feel very privileged. Very, very privileged to be working with you. And one of the reasons is I'm learning new shit all the time. All the time. And when I first came into this, into the idea of impeachment, I came in the same way many people feel about it now, or think about impeachment now, which is it is the I thought it was the attempt to remove the president from office, right? That's how I envisioned impeachment in my mind. After all of this, after everything I've been allowed to learn because of my working on this show, I now see impeachment very, very differently. Impeachment is not the attempt to remove an official from office. It is merely calling their actions into question. In fact, after reading and having read to me the words of the founding fathers, the bar was set very, very low. And the reason the bar was set very, very low is any time, particularly a president, is to commit an action or do something that calls his honor, his integrity, his actions into question. His power, his actions cannot be above reproach. His power is not sacrosanct. The people need a method in which to say, I'm calling you into question. Now, I personally think that impeachment has been far too rare. The way I look at it now, I think there isn't a president that we have ever had or will ever have that shouldn't have faced at least 2 or 3 impeachments, maybe. I mean, I liked Obama. I thought he was a pretty good president. There are things like, I'm sorry, he lied when he said you can keep your insurance. That was a lie. It just was. He should have been impeached. Now, he shouldn't have been removed from office. Of course not. But should he maybe have been given a letter from maybe Congress saying listen, what you did here wasn't okay? Maybe he should have been censured. I don't know what should have happened, but he should have been, his actions, his power should have been called into question. He should have been told this was unacceptable behavior. Right now, the way people are talking about impeachment creates a culture where the president's power is sacrosanct, where it has to be rare. The only way you should ever call his power into question is if he's done something truly horrible. And that creates a culture where the president's power, his honor, his integrity is beyond reproach unless he has done something so ridiculously horrible that we are wanting to remove him from office. But the thing is removal from office is but one possibility of impeachment. Just as you would something weird happens. Something strange happens. The milk in the refrigerator goes missing. You ask people, "Hey, have you seen the milk?" You know what I mean? That isn't seen as an attempt to remove someone from your house. Now, if you find out later that they took the milk and they poured it on your motherboard, maybe you remove them from your house.
That is about my bar, actually, right about there. It's like, you know, even for my 8-year-old. Now, your future in the Soutter residency is going to be into question here based on the next few answers.
But we need to create a culture where presidents don't feel that their power is a fortress. that they are completely above reproach. We need to create a culture. I think that impeachment should be common, that we should be going through this process all the damn time, so that any president, Democrat, Republican, Independent, man, woman, if we elect a goddamn donkey, should know that once they're
I don't think Dave is running for office, but
oh,
okay.
okay. But really, they should know that once they are in that
Can't solve
office, that they don't have 4 years of job security. You know what I mean? That the citizens, if they fuck up, will call them to task. You know, and that's my views on impeachment have gone from what most people think to no. It even if all you're gonna do is give the president a slap on the wrist or a strongly worded letter, then you should be calling them into question every single time it is appropriate to do so. But yeah, that I wanted to get that out there because I think far too many people fundamentally misunderstand, as I did, what impeachment is.
All right, well, thank you very much for that. We have a super chat. I'll get to it in a minute, but first I do want to bring out our guest, Landon Noll, who we sincerely appreciate. He's back with us. He is. We were able to confirm last time that he is an anti-Australiite. We are able to look past that because we here care about facts and about having open and honest discussions, despite some occasional bigotry. I think that we can. I'll call it what I.
Although I do want to point out with regards to Australia that one of the things that happened, and it's here on this arm, is I received a pattern of 5 bug bites. And if you look at the thing, it's in the shape of Crux, which is a Southern Cross. Even the 5th smaller star is there. Like these 5 cheeky, mossy buggers from Australia bit me, and I have proof on my arm that Australia exists, at least.
So now you're saying that all there is in Australia is bugs that bite people, and that it's a horrible place because you go there and you're going to get bitten, and you're going to get you're just fueling your anti-Australia sentiment.
Well, I mean, if you consider the number of horseflies, mossies, and midges and other things that are there, I mean, if you were to survey living things in the continent of Australia, the chances
you're just telling it like it is.
A human is relatively small, given the number of flies that are there.
People aren't important to you. I understand. I get it.
Anyway, I had a great time. I had a great time in Australia. Red Eye is.
Oh, now he's walking it back. Okay. Yeah, no, go ahead. Talk about how you had a great time.
But anyway, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your time zone and latitude. And hello from your friendly secular astronomer. We're here to talk about impeachment.
Thank you so much for joining us. Oh, and I guess I did have a complaint about my audio. I don't know. Maybe
audio sounds fine to me.
Okay, well, maybe I just sound that way naturally. I don't know. Stupid Horror Energy, $5. It doesn't matter. He still has the libertarian tinfoil hat right. I think that's in regards to Trump getting, and the losing the. Yeah, it only matters because the question is how much money are they going to get, and the evangelicals are the ones who put the money into the coffers of senators, and that's what they care about most right now. They are more than happy to, in order to keep the tinfoil nuts from really drawing attention in a negative way. They won't instigate with them, but they won't cater to them either.
The thing is the Republican Party has long pandered to the evangelical right because they get a lot of votes. They move votes. You know what I mean? In fact, in general, religious institutions are very good at leveraging and moving votes. And Trump long had the evangelical right's support simply because they knew that he would be anti-abortion, and that is, let's face it, that is a single issue voter issue if you're on the evangelical right.
And I think that's true, and I think it's the evangelicals that are the biggie, even more than the Tea Party, although there is significant overlap there.
That's true.
All right, so Landon, would you tell us a little bit about the history of your work in government and how that brought you to the process of impeachment?
Sure, and I'll give you a little bit of that, and then I'd like sort of try to focus on, let's say, a nonpartisan thing about the history of impeachment, what it does, why, and also some of the nuances that are actually going to be quite important.
Let's start with that. Let's start with so tell us tell us about a bit more about the process. Then, if you want to start with that, then we can get into
the history.
Story.
The thing is that the history, at least when you talk about the English language, impeachment. Authorities differ, but there was a use of impeachment on a Baron Latimer in the latter part of the 14th century. And the issue, important to understand that impeachment is, maybe you say, is an indictment or to impugn someone's ability to hold office. Right. One of the more famous impeachments in early times was of Charles I. The Rump Parliament was set up to try him. And one of the things that Charles I said was, I have been appointed by God to rule. You have no ability to question my ability to be king. Of course, there were members of parliament that said, well, execute him anyway and let God judge him.
I guess it works both ways, right?
Yeah, that's a double-edged sword, I guess. Yeah.
Well, and if you know something about how he was executed, they particularly wanted to be sure that he had a chance for someone else to be true. But moving forward, one of the things that happened was that there were examples of stuff in early colonies, or Virginia and Massachusetts, for example, had impeachment clauses patterned after the British example. And this is pre-U.S. Constitution, 1776, 1777, 1780 timeframes. And the issue from the time of that phase of Parliament was this. For really critical votes in the House of Commons, it was a practice of various sides to try to prevent members of Parliament from reaching House of Parliament, because the way that the House of Commons votes, and still votes today.
You mean from physically getting there, like going to work in the morning, from
yes,
bar them from getting there. Yes.
The chamber, right?
Because, yes.
Because one of the stupid things that the so-called United Kingdom's House of Commons still does is, in order to vote, you walk through one or two doors. And so if you can prevent people from going through a door, you can block a vote. In fact, lobbyists, the word lobbyist comes from the fact that the lobby of those two doors is where people try to persuade members of Parliament to go through the door they want to go through. But in cases of serious cases of major battles that went on in House of Commons, it was not unusual for forces that attempt to try to arrest members of Parliament, to try to waylay them, try to imprison them, a number of things, particularly because members of Parliament coming from the far flungs of the realm to Parliament to vote. If you could prevent them coming to vote and delay them, their vote doesn't count. So, for example, and this is not just Brexit, right? One of the early going things, one notorious examples, was the vote in Parliament to establish the Church of England as the official church of the state. There were a lot of people that wanted the Catholic Church to remain the official church. The quorum of members of Parliament that actually voted was somewhere around 23% of members of Parliament. This wasn't because a whole bunch of people decided to scatter, but that Catholics and the Protestants were and the Church of England, sort of middle folks, were arresting people, waylaying people, getting people drunk, doing those sorts of things, prevent them from showing up, right? And it passed by only a few votes. It was a matter of battle of which side could prevent the others from showing up. And so it's one of the things.
Let me interrupt real quick. What does it mean to have a quorum?
Well, a quorum means, are there a sufficient number of people to carry out the process of the legislature, of the Parliament, right? Because you could sit there and say, well, one person show up in the chamber and say, I believe this should be a law. Let's have a vote. I vote yes, done, right? that says no.
Because it's just one person. So the quorum is the minimum bar. If there are fewer than this many people voting, the vote cannot be held and or does not count.
But one of the things in particular about quorum is that it has to be recognized. You do not automatically have a situation where you have this electronic vote counter and all of a sudden you don't have the right number of people there, right? You can pass laws and carry out business, perhaps improperly, if no one challenges the quorum status. So, for example, the International Astronomical Union declared Pluto not to be a planet by 300 and some odd members.
Okay.
In about a 20,000.
This is going to cause a problem. We have Neil deGrasse Tyson fans in the audience, so I'm just saying.
And I have debated Neil, and Neil now I did on this topic, and he now recognizes that Pluto is a dwarf planet, and dwarf is a type of planet.
That's not the last I heard on it, but okay, if he does, that's good.
He recognizes it, but yes. So Pluto, the planet, and it's a dwarf planet, and just like dwarf stars are stars, and dwarf galaxies are galaxies, and dwarf people are people.
That's where we draw the line.
That's just because there's one under your hat.
Let's move back but that was an example of a body.
I can neither confirm nor deny.
Where only 380 members out of the many 10,000 members or so voted. And the fact that no one stood up and said, and challenged the court. And you have to say, I observe a lack of a quorum. I demand a count. And so they go and have a roll call, right? And in fact, quorum is used by parliamentary procedures to delay things, right? As they're trying to lobby and fix stuff like that. So quorum really means, has it been acknowledged of a sufficient number of people to carry out the business? So going back to Parliament, one of the problems with the House of Commons was this game of the monarch and other forces waylaying members of Parliament, preventing them from being able to vote. So in the U.S. Constitution, and the people framing the Constitution, even there's some articles of the Articles of Confederation, they simply said, we can't have the executive branch, the president, that executes law, that has a power of enforcing law, arresting judges, judicial branch, and legislative branch, just because they don't like what they're doing. But in fact, that happened in spades in the former United Kingdom. And in particular, you had kings coming in to Parliament trying to arrest members that don't like them. You had members of government, even post then, of prime ministers ordering investigations of members to try to prevent them from being able to exercise because they were being particularly obnoxious, right? So this notion of trying to prevent the abuse of power of the police state from going after other branches they wanted to offset that. How do they offset that? Well, they give members, elected officials, appointed officials, and judges a form of immunity. It's a limited form of immunity. But what it means is that if you are conducting office, right? If you are going about official business, the executive branch can't turn around and arrest you because you are you're voting, right? So a person deciding to form a bill to oppose something the president wants can't be arrested because the president doesn't like what they're doing.
Yeah.
Now, the problem with that is that if you then say they have absolute immunity, then they can abuse their power, right? Because they didn't want, on the other hand, the people from being able to do whatever they want to. So they created this process of saying the president cannot order, or effectively the police cannot go and arrest someone as part of official duty. In fact, it's a crime to interfere with elected officials carrying out of their official duty. That's actually a criminal offense. And people have been prosecuted for that. What you have to do is to say, should you remain in office? Because the other hand, if you have somebody who is doing really bad things, how do you stop them? The answer is you impeach their ability to hold office. You then try them on that impeachment. If you think of it as the indictment, and if they're found guilty, you remove them from office. And so the impeachment process really starts with if you will, an investigation or a consideration. People say, should this person hold office? And then you go to the process of drafting articles to potentially say, well, here's why their ability to hold office should be impeached, should be indicted. And that's the list of articles. So in an investigation, there's subcommittees that form stuff. In the case of the House, there's a very specific process by which a impeachment process is started, right? Because the House will designate a committee or committees to look into impeachment, and only then when a draft bill of particulars is brought to the House can you start impeachment. So it'd be like saying, in the judicial style, it might be saying that, well, some police get the idea that someone's doing something bad, so they investigate. And they come up with a potential list of charges. They talk to the district attorney, and there's an agreement on saying, here are the potential charges. Now, just because you've been impeached, like indictment, doesn't mean you're guilty, right? All it means is you've been charged. In the case of in judicial, it's your liberty to be at liberty in society. In the case of impeachment, it's your ability to hold office. So when you've been impeached, then what happens? Well, then there is a further investigation on particular of the article of the bills in particular, right? What have you been impeached on? There's further discussion. And then there's a trial. And if in the trial you are found guilty, then you're removed from office. Now, a couple of things that are really important to understand about this. First of all, impeachment is a political process. And in fact, this is one of the things that Gerald Ford, as the senator, said was it's a political process. He didn't mean it's that in kind of the common parlance of people sort of impugn politics. It means it is a process, just like establishing a bill and getting it voted on and getting it approved or vetoed or overridden or not. That's a political process. So impeachment is a process, much like bills are enacted. And the other thing, of course, is that impeachment merely then establishes a requirement for a trial. The other thing that's very important to understand is that trial that's held is not a judicial trial. It is not a legal, like with the Supreme Court precedents. It is a trial by the legislative body. So it's not.
So there's no criminal. There's no possibility of any kind of criminal or civil penalties for the outcome of this trial. They're incapable of say, okay, we're going to put you in jail.
Yes, because now it's true in early on in the 14th, 15th, 16th century, impeachment also included things like execution. But right. When you talk about the time you get to the point where you had some of the first colonies in the U.S. and then the U.S. Constitution, impeachment was merely their ability to hold office and to retain that limited immunity. So, for example, President Trump cannot be arrested for carrying out his duties as president, right? The military can't decide under the Constitution to go and arrest him just because they don't like what he's doing. But he can be impeached by the House, tried by the Senate, found guilty, and therefore he's removed from office. At that point, he's subjected to everything else. So it's important to understand that you can be impeached, convicted, and then tried in U.S. courts and found guilty is not double jeopardy, because you might be impeached for bribery.
Yeah.
You might be convicted by the Senate or the legislative body and removed from office, but then you can be subject to criminal prosecutions and not double jeopardy.
Right. So now, what is double jeopardy for our audience? For those who don't know, what does double jeopardy mean?
I mean, it's basically being tried twice for the same crime, right? They try you. Yes. you're found not guilty, and they try you again because they want to try it again, right?
And they want to keep going, and so in order to prevent that, which did happen in the older British system, it did happen where they just keep trying until eventually they hooked you, and you get one shot in the U.S. at least for criminal, one shot for civil. If you really want to do it that way, that's how they got OJ.
So someone who has been impeached and convicted and removed from office can then be tried and criminally, right? For example, so let's say you're impeached for crimes and removed from office, then you can be tried for those crimes and put in jail. Because remember, the impeachment is indicting your ability to hold office, the ability to remove your limited essentially immunity, and then you're tried, and then you're convicted. So one thing that's important to understand is that there's a phase change that occurs. If you've been an elected official, you've been impeached, then your ability to hold office is in question, but has not been absolutely determined. So some things start to happen, such as if you impeach a member of the legislature, that person's ability to go on legislative floor and vote on bills is suspended.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Another thing that happens with impeachment is, and the Constitution is very clear on this, is that the president cannot pardon for matters of impeachment. If somebody is, so there's two or three issues I want to unpack there. So let me, and actually three, I think.
Go ahead.
So the first one that I just want to cover, we'll cover this quickly. So first, impeachment can be applied to any elected official. So
appointed
official. So we could even impeach, for example, one of the Supreme Court justices.
Yes, in fact,
because you're right, that's appointed.
Of the 20 federal officers that have been impeached, 15 were federal judges. There were 3 presidents. There was a cabinet secretary and a senator. So there's a case of appointed judges and appointed cabinet secretary that were impeached. So it's an office holder is who can be impeached.
And I find that interesting because I'd forgotten about that, but that's a very important. So 2 more quick ones, and then I certainly want to continue with the story. And I think Ansgar may have a couple of questions. But so so Nixon could not pardon himself to avoid impeachment, or could not pardon other people who might be in. Once the impeachment process has started, anybody who's involved in it is actually cannot be pardoned, and that's of course done to prevent
the president from essentially going in and removing the thing of impeachment. So you cannot pardon for matters of impeachment.
So does that mean anything involved under the articles of impeachment he cannot pardon for?
Well, in theory, but of course, if there's disputes, what happens? Well, it goes to the courts, and the courts are interpreters of the Constitution.
Right.
But in fact, for example, had the House of Representatives, and I had a discussion with a former representative that was considering voting on the Nixon impeachment, and he was like, "You're right." Said, what the House of Representatives could have done is, even when Nixon announced his intention to resign, is they could have rushed to the floor articles of impeachment. Had Nixon been actually impeached by the House, he was not. He was under threat. The committee had formed the articles, and the Speaker of the House, Noll, had approved it to come forward, but it was to the next day. And what happened was there was a delegation from the Senate of 3 senators that essentially marched into the White House. In fact, they weren't announced, and the White House guards basically said, "Don't screw with us. We're going to see the president right now." And they blasted past people, got into the Oval Office, and it was a famous senator who said to Nixon, walked in, barged in and said, "Mr. President, we have just come from the Senate, and there are 97 senators willing to convict you, and only 3 that are unwilling to even consider finding you not guilty. And I am not one of those." Basically,
Wow.
they told Nixon, the game's up, right? And it comes to the Senate, you might have 3 votes.
Mm-hmm.
And fine. And so Nixon, was then people explained to Nixon, because he went on a tirade, the very famous for people that saw it. But effectively, they said the game's up, because had the House, and he announced his intention to resign, but had the House actually impeached him, Ford would have been unable to pardon him.
Oh, so
by resigning.
Yeah,
sorry, Paul.
I was going to say, so even future presidents can't pardon for crimes that have been impeached on. So let's say, for instance,
for matters of impeachment,
right? So let's say, for instance, that let's say Trump resigns. There are some people here sitting opposite of me who think that is a very likely scenario. I think he's insane. But let's say Trump.
I don't think very likely. I think more likely than not. But yeah.
Yeah. Let's say Trump. Let's say Trump resigns. So for the articles of impeachment that have come forward, right? Pence couldn't then. Pence couldn't, for instance, once he's sworn into office, pardon Trump for those specific things.
Yes. Now, other things, yeah. Other things, yes. And so it's one of those things where and this was put in the Constitution. If you look at the power of the pardon, it's extremely broad, but it says except in cases of impeachment, right? And that was very for the purpose of, because remember, it's officials, right? So it's cabinet members, it's judges, people he's appointed, and other things. And so people, they not just the president and the vice president, but other members of the executive branch, such as appointed cabinet officers, can be impeached. And if the president could turn around and just pardon people, impeachment would have no effect.
Right.
Right. The president could pardon himself, then what good would impeachment be? So when you are impeached, your ability to pardon by the president is essentially set aside.
Well, see, and that's what fascinates me, is that once impeached, even other presidents, future presidents, can't pardon you for those specific things. That's fascinating. I didn't know that. It
doesn't say the current president. It says,
well, and I think that's because as you would, this is why I think the history was a good idea, because really the purpose of the impeachment was to drop the shield. It was to penetrate the immunity that was given to prevent those kinds of brawls. And so seen in that light, once somebody's attempting to drop that immunity, you should never be able to just make the whole process moot by.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. This is I
was just going to add some context, and does make complete sense why Nixon would resign in that scenario, so that he could have the power of the pardon to avoid criminal prosecution.
By the way, your salary gets suspended during impeachment. And if you're convicted, your benefits go away. So Nixon was able to hold on to his benefits. And then Ford did something horrible, in which he said, I pardon Nixon for all crimes he may have committed. So whatever, and it was like a blank check for Nixon to do any crimes even afterwards, right? It was a horrible thing. And I got I had the opportunity to tell Ford that I believe he lied when he said there was no quid pro quo. I believe that President Ford was appointed vice president with the understanding he would do the right thing for that political party. And Ford, by the way, went, because there was actually an articles of impeachment being drafted for Ford for his pardon, and Ford actually came to the Congress and testified as president. Now, I think he lied, but nonetheless, understand, by the way, that impeachment's not rare. I mean, there have been impeachment proceedings initiated 62 times since House of Representatives was formed in 1789. So on average, the House of Representatives impeaches somebody about once every 3.7 years.
Oh, wow.
And actual impeachment passing by majority, because remember, articles of impeachment just means it's like the district attorney investigated to see if there's a crime or so forth.
Right.
But actual articles like a grand jury indicting someone. Remember, indictment does not mean you're guilty. Indictment means that you should go before a judge to adjudicate whether or not you are guilty. So indictments happen about once every 11 and a half years.
Well, let me ask you a question. And I want to give a hypothetical to give this some context. We do try to maintain reasonably neutral politically. So it's going to be a little hard to do this without people thinking that there's political motivations. There isn't. Don't anyone read into this, please. But with what you've said about suspension of benefits, suspension of pay, suspension of their ability to operate in their capacity, their official capacity, and then even actually just going back to executions, you had said that execution was in fact impossible. If someone is earlier, that's right. Okay, so if someone has a YouTube channel and has a co-host that he's thinking of impeaching, how much of this process might be applicable up to and including like the execute? And I'm not saying, I just mean like hypothetically speaking.
So impeachment in a YouTube parlance would be somebody filing a complaint about violation of community guidelines. And
okay, where do I find those?
And then
or where would somebody find those hypothetically?
And then Susan
where's Nick's camera and microphone on this interface? Let's see here.
You're guilty, and your 1,000-character thing is presented to the But anyway, so back.
But you and I talk later. You know these policies really well.
I'm sorry. We seem to be losing Nick here.
Nick's been lost for some time, but okay.
Some people, again, it's a legislative political process, and so legislators get together and say, I believe this office holder, not just the president, but even appointed officials, judges, should be impeached. They then, through House procedures, get a committee or committees to consider, to investigate, right? And the committee comes up with evidence, and then people say, "Hey, here's a bunch of evidence. This looks like this might be impeachable," and so there will be a committee appointed to draft the articles of impeachment. Those articles will come in form of a bill. Now, when the bill goes to the floor, that bill is what's called has privilege status, right? It means that while it basically interrupts the rest of the process and says, here's a serious matter, impeachment, right? You cannot filibuster in there. You could not decide, hey, let's stop right now and have a bill to declare the marigold to be the national flower or something. It is of highest priority when the impeachment bill goes to the floor of the legislature, right? And then it's debated according to the rules of the legislature. And just like any bill, it requires a majority that is 50% plus one to pass it. So in the case, now in the background, I was on a city council. I was first on the charter review committee, then the library board, then I was elected as city council. I also became vice mayor and then mayor pro tem. And in that process, we had a legislative body of 7 members. And so to get an impeachment on the calendar required a subcommittee to submit consideration of bill articles impeachment. And so a subquorum could do that. And then it required a majority. It required 4 of the 7 to vote for the impeachment. Now, by the way, one of the things we did as a procedure, because the mayor was the person that was being impeached, and the mayor was a voting member, was one of the 7. We used a Robert's Rules of Order procedure to say, essentially, you cannot chair a meeting for which there is a action that disproportionately affects you, right?
Yes.
So the mayor was being impeached, and we essentially used Robert's Rules of Orders to bounce the mayor out of the chair. because the mayor presiding, you can imagine, because in a legislative body, typically the person who's chairing the meeting has nearly absolute power. Right.
Oh, of course, but if they're the ones that this gets them out of the where they can, and I mean the same thing happens in the House and in the Senate, but especially in the House, the Speaker of the House has the entire schedule. So the Speaker of the House can sit there and say, "That's a great bill. We're going to schedule it for 6 weeks from never."
Yes. Okay. So the House, in theory, could impeach the leader of the House. And that process, they would set the leader of the House aside so that person could not essentially say rule out of order and squash the bill. So again, there's this initial sort of investigation, and then the procedures by which a bill is created, just like a law gets created. But here a case, the impeachment only has to pass the legislature. It does not require the executive to sign it. It doesn't require, in the case of bicameral, that is a house that has an upper and lower house. It doesn't require the other house to agree. It merely just has to have a majority of the legislature saying, yes, this person should be impeached. Now, when you talk about those benefits, what I mean by that is that the pay is suspended. It doesn't mean that the person doesn't collect pay, because if they then have the trial and they're acquitted, their pay is resumed, right? It's just benefits in terms of right now. Technically, Donald Trump is not accruing a salary until there is a trial. Of course, if he is found guilty and removed from office, then his benefits terminate from the date of impeachment. If he's found innocent, his back pay is restored.
Here's a question:
Are there any other well, why don't you go on, Ansgar? Sorry.
I know that a president can be found guilty and just given something like a censure or even a slap on the wrist, or there's a lot of different things that can come out of impeachment. If someone were to, let's say, receive a slap on the wrist, let's say they just get a strongly worded letter, right? That's all that they get. Do their benefits resume?
Oh, yes. So now, because understand impeachment is not a strongly worded letter. Impeachment actually puts at jeopardy their ability to have this limited ability and even to hold office. Now, they're not removed because you can't remove them without a trial. And again, it's very important. It's a legislative trial. It's not a legal trial.
Right. No, what I'm saying though is they can be. I know that we've been discussing impeachment for a while now, and just because a president, let's say, is found guilty of the articles of impeachment within this, doesn't necessarily mean they are removed from office. It can be decided that yes, they are guilty, but no, this doesn't deserve removal from office. Right. That can happen.
Yeah, I mean, technically, the trial could sit there and say, effectively, we find you not guilty for reasons of articles, but we will instead vote to censure you.
Right. So if they, what I'm saying is, if they're found to have done the thing that is in the articles of impeachment, but they decide not to remove from office, do they keep their benefits or
rephrase it? How much leeway do they have in a guilty? Let's say they find him guilty. Do they, specifically in the presidential impeachment, do they have leeway in what they can do, and if so, how much?
In the case, if you are found guilty of at least one article of impeachment, your ability to hold office is terminated. Right.
Okay.
But the legislative body could sit there and say, we will find you for purposes of impeachment not guilty, but censure you or condemn you for being a jerk, right, or whatever thing, right? But understand that impeachment is very broad, particularly in the Constitution. It talks about treason, high crimes or misdemeanors, a broad range of stuff, and people have been impeached. Actually, had articles of impeachment in the House voted on by a majority for a number of things. Like, for example, the first one was a senator that was found guilty for conspiring to assist Britain to capture a Spanish colony.
Oh, wow.
Right. We had another one, a judge that was found guilty, accused of drunkenness and unlawful rulings.
Unlawful rulings.
Now, we had one of my ancestors, Samuel Chase, was accused of political bias in arbitrary rulings and promoting partisan political agenda on the bench. right? Can you imagine the number of U.S. Supreme Court members? He was a Supreme Court justice. He was acquitted, by the way, but abuse of power, corruption. There was a person, a judge that was impeached by and accused of supporting the Confederacy.
Oh wow!
Andrew Johnson, as president, was accused of violating the Tenure Act. He fired a cabinet officer without going through proper procedures. There was a judge.
But that one, if I recall, though, on that one, he was guilty. In fact, by the letter of the law, they refused to convict essentially because the Tenure Act was created explicitly for the purpose of impeaching him, and he was the only human being who could violate that act because it only applied to him and only for his term. It was deliberately to impeach him. They
fell one vote short of the 2/3 required because in the judicial process, we need to talk about the judicial process as well of the judging of impeachment. But he was fell one short. But for example, there was a judge that was impeached for drunkenness, right? Another one for draft. There was a senator, a cabinet secretary for graft and corruption. There was a judge that was impeached for failing to live in his district.
That's awesome.
Right?
So I want to get to Johnson just because I think that does deal with. So Andrew Johnson was so hated by the legislature. They created a law that said that him and only him couldn't pick members of his own cabinet.
Yeah.
Now, it wouldn't apply to future presidents. It wasn't. It had nothing to do, and nobody had ever considered a law like this before. Of course, you can pick your own cabinet, but they said he couldn't. And they did that because he knew he'd have to. And once he did, he's violated the law, and now he's committed an impeachable offense. Yeah. So it was a law designed. I mean, only one human being on the planet could break that law.
About Andrew Johnson. We're talking about Lyndon Baines Johnson, but Andrew Johnson. He became president because Lincoln was assassinated. He was also a Southerner. He was born, I believe Johnson was actually born in Raleigh, North Carolina, right? So you just had Lincoln, you had just had the Civil War, you just had Lincoln assassinated by a Southerner, and the whole issue about Reconstruction and return of the defeat of the Confederacy and return to there, and they had a president who was effectively a Southerner, right? Drove some people absolutely bonkers, right? Now, moreover, Andrew Johnson was not a shy person. This person was known for going to the media and saying all kinds of crazy things. In fact, one of the articles of impeachment talked about the fact that Andrew Johnson would hold rallies of his supporters. And in those rallies, he would talk about how the Congress was a bunch of do-nothings and no good and all kinds of other crazy stuff. He would even hold rallies on the Capitol steps to try to incite the people against Congress. And that was one of the articles of impeachment. Now, I'm not trying to draw parallels with any current or former president. I'm just giving you
I understand. I find hypotheticals very important, and I think we should all make sure that we keep track on.
But tax people have been used for tax corruption, for failing to recuse on obscenity cases, right? With this person, I mean, and prior to Trump, the last person who was impeached was a judge in Louisiana that was making false financial disclosures. Basically, he was kind of, you might say, fraud Louisiana style. And he was actually tried in the Senate and found guilty and bounced out. In fact, I think it was like near unanimous. And in fact, it took less than a day of people because people knew he was guilty as hell. And he removed from office, disqualified, and now and he faced essentially then criminal prosecution. So understand that impeachment is not just for the president; it's for any person that has some level of immunity based on their office holders. It impugns their ability. Now, you just don't decide I'm going to impeach. In fact, there's been a number of successful attempts to impeach people. There was actually an unsuccessful attempt to try to impeach Barack Obama. And so it's not just but again, they were not.
How many attempts were there?
if I'm trying to remember on that case of set, but I know that. I mean, I know that there were several attempts to try and do it, but it never was able to. They were able to get enough members to say to the House rules under Ryan, let's begin to form a committee to consider impeachment. Because the only way you can impeach in the House is to have a bill before the House voted on for a majority. How do you get a bill to the House? Well, you have to have the appropriate committees that decide that a bill is in order, right? And so the Rules Committee and the Speaker of the House has something to do with that. And how do you get that done? Well, you get a bunch of congressmen together to say, hey, we should have this bill. And they try to essentially convince the leadership that it's worthwhile to have a bill. So all the investigations that occurred was prior to the impeachment bills being drafted, was the homework necessary to do so. Much like, let's say, in the judicial side, someone who is convicted by a grand jury has to have grand jury hearings, right? And typically, again, to protect the process and protect the person, those hearings are done in secret, right? So the notion of having a committee operating in closed doors to consider testimony for potentially drafting articles is not something that's improper or so forth. The silly folks that had a run on the skiff room in the House knew either were stupid or knew full well what they were doing, the theater they were doing, which is when the proceedings of a grand jury, for example, are considered, are sealed, are considered, and not disclosed in any way, because you can have a grand jury consider indicting you, and they refuse to indict you. You don't want the fact that, well, this person was investigated by the grand jury. That's not fair, right? So in the case of prior to having that bill, remember, it's a bill that gets voted on by the legislature. Yep. The leading up to it, an investigation can be done in secret. At some point, it becomes public, right? So we were so in the case of our group on our city council, there were three of us as sub quorum, so we couldn't control business, but three of us would meet. And we would actually met in a place.
Let me interrupt real quick, because I'd really like to get into your experience here. Would that be the equivalent of, say, the Judiciary Committee? So it's a smaller group that's going to decide that we're going to posit. Okay, so your sub-quorum would be like the Judiciary Committee in the larger process, maybe.
Yeah. And so, but you can have other committees. Like, for example, let's say impeachment has to do with finance. Well, then the Taxation and Finance Committee is there. Just like if you have a bill that deals with trade, well, the trade committee or the trade subcommittee might occur. So if you have issues of impeachment, you'll have committees that specialize in that area doing investigations. And that's entirely proper. That's, in fact, that's what the U.S. Constitution says that Congress is supposed to do, right? If you have a bill that decides to consider the type of foreign oranges that can be allowed to import into the U.S., well, there's an agricultural committee that weighs on that. The taxation committee weighs on that, and commerce and trade committees weigh on that, right? So having multiple committees considering a bill is quite normal. And impeachment is just a bill. So if you're going to impeach someone on fraud and tax evasion and, let's say, other criminal statutes, well, then you'll have the Judiciary Committee and the Taxation Committee and other things begin to do the investigations. And they can do investigations, particularly if they're doing it nicely, in private, in closed-door hearings. There's nothing improper. Just like if the district attorney goes before convenes a grand jury to consider something, the convening and that process is secret, and it's only when if the grand jury indicts and the judge then they bring forth the indictment to a judge, that becomes known. Similar way, so having this closed door hearings is not there. Now, people objected to what was happening with regards to some of those committees, but in fact, it's actually quite proper. So they either were those people were stupid, or they deliberately were trying to mislead stuff. And again, it's notion of impeachment is not the trial. It's should the person's limited ability be impugned. Now, in our case, we were considering it was the mayor that was considering being impeached, and so there's a subcommittee, 3 people that would meet, and we met. I'm not going to really know, but we met in a famous Japanese restaurant that's opposite the Apple headquarters at Infinite Loop. The place is probably known as Icky's, but it's a Egibachi is this Japanese restaurant.
That's a terrible thing to be known as.
It was a great place, right?
Not as bad as the Pooping Palace, I guess.
Icky's was a well-known sort of Silicon Valley hangout. But it was not in Sunnyvale. It was actually it stayed next door. And we would always, and it wasn't this like my little touch, that we would always have a reservation. And the reason we did a Japanese restaurant is, they have those rooms off on the side with the curtains and sort of secluded spot. Well, we could then have these discussions, right, about the impeachment process. And I always made the reservations under the name Richard Nixon. So we'll get together and understand it's a political process, right? This is not a judicial process. And so one of the things in particular that came forward was.
So you were biased, is what you're saying, but please continue.
Now, I will say that I will also say that I was one of the 2 key votes to make the person mayor. So I made the biggest political mistake in my political life, which was to support this person becoming mayor.
And then you reversed it. Not many people can sue you. Now, I believe, if I recall, you successfully had them removed.
Yes. So the person was found guilty and removed as mayor. And so, but back to the thing about the process is, so we were meeting in secret, which is entirely proper. It was not a full body action of the legislature. It was a sub quorum. And then when we came to kind of agreement over what was going on, then we moved it forward. And by the way, one of the things that we agreed on was that if we were successful in removing the mayor, none of the original drafters and articles of impeachment would accept the mayorship.
So then none of you would benefit. Well, no, of course not. Apparently you were handing it off to the Chinese, who were supporting your efforts. And you said it here, I hope none of your old cronies from, the backroom deals were. All right, now we do have, just so you know, we've got about 5 or 10 minutes left. So we're gonna need to. We do want to hear. We want to go through the process of what you went through, though. So please continue.
So there was a bill that was put forth in the legislature. We then had a hearing, and then we had a mayor removed, and we had a majority of people approve the impeachment, which allowed us to set a trial date. Mm-hmm. Now, one thing to understand is very important is that the trial can consider separate matters from the impeachment. So we had additional.
Let me interrupt. Would that mean maybe they'd call witnesses?
Yes.
But Mitch McConnell said no.
One of the things that happened, that was, again, this is not judicial, but this is legislative, is that we were again given power to subpoena. And so we began to subpoena people. And so even though the articles of impeachment had a number of articles, when we did an investigation, we found a whole bunch of other stuff. And part of it was that people privately would come to us and say, please subpoena me and force me to testify. And we'd say, okay.
So,
and they testify, oh my, right? We learned even worse. It was even worse than what we had even impugned. So we had the trial, we had additional items that we found the person guilty on in addition to the articles of impeachment.
So you can add items after the articles are drafted.
Okay, so yes, and then the important thing about the trial is a legislative trial. It's not a judicial trial. Mm-hmm. So the legislature, like in this case for Trump, would be the Senate. The Senate is the judge and the jury.
Right.
Now, and it's
wait, I'm sorry. In what circumstance are they the judge and the jury?
They are the absolute judge and jury, right? The only thing that the Supreme Court justice does is presides over.
Oh, he's just presiding over. Okay, that clears up one question I had. You're right. Okay, that makes sense. That clears up.
So
adjudicated by the Senate during Clinton's trial, because Rehnquist was trying to essentially say, I'm ruling on stuff, and effectively a senator rose up and said, I'm sorry, but it's the Senate that decides the rules of the Senate. The Senate holds the trial. The Senate is the judge and the jury, and there's deliberation, and the actual Senate said yes. So we are the judge and we're the jury. So we're the judge to determine how the process occurs, and we're the jury who finds the person guilty or not guilty.
I didn't know that. So even though there's these articles of impeachment, right? That's just since that's just the beginning of the process. If mid impeachment process, they have somebody testify about who the fuck knows, campaign finance or something like that, that stuff can be added on.
They add stuff on, right? So one of the things in particular to understand is that there's a 2-phase process. The impeachment bill has to be given a majority, and then the trial occurs. But you have to transmit. In the case of unicameral, it's basically setting the date. In the case of bicameral, like a Senate and House, the House has to send to the Senate and bring forward the prosecutors. So the original people that drafted the bills of impeachment, in our case, we decided were going to be the prosecutors. In the case of the House, the House forms a delegation of people to go to the Senate and ask permission of the Senate to enter the chamber and then begin the trial. So one thing that's important to understand is that Pelosi has not designated the prosecutors. They had not designated the House members to go to the Senate. So, and in fact, Pelosi can sit there on that for months and months or years, right? There's nothing required. The Senate cannot take up the articles of impeachment until the House transmits the articles to it and provides them the prosecutors.
Well, I did want to cover, I want to ask one sort of procedural question before that and then one after. So now I would assume that one reason people might ask to be, also an additional reason why they might ask to be called would be because that way, and ask to be subpoenaed is because that way they can testify and say things that they might want to say that they are otherwise prohibited or wouldn't want to because they wouldn't want to be seen.
There were people that really feared the mayor, right? And
exactly.
And we had a problem that she had made threats to use her handgun in her bag to shoot us. So we were on the dais with bulletproof vests, and we had plainclothes people around there waiting to jump in.
Jesus, Landon, you don't play.
It's getting real.
And it was we had considerations of this stuff, and one thing in particular was that we could not prevent her from entering the chambers, and we didn't have the authority to search her bag and remove the handgun. Right?
Oh no!
Oh my God!
Because imagine what happens if the legislature could say all the people from this party we don't like have to be searched and all their
of course.
So we had very little ability to do that during that particular time, and it was a fearful thing, and we had grave concerns, right, for that. But so when people came forward and said, "Please form people to testify," it was part of trying to use excuses saying, "Well, I was compelled." So it's called a legislative subpoena, just like how Congress can subpoena people to testify, and you're not supposed to blow it off. So it is entirely proper for the House to consider obstruction of Congress to try to prevent people from testifying for Congress. Just the same. Now, it turned out that the mayor did, in fact, try to influence witnesses, right? She was trying to find out who were testifying and who was testifying, and then try to lean on them to not testify. So that was one of the things that was added in the trial there. Again, the trial is actually on the article of impeachment, and really the trial is, should the person remain in office? And so you can consider other reasons even in the article of impeachment. The article of impeachment is merely just the beginning set. You can investigate and find things. So there's an investigation between impeachment and trial. The trial is not a judicial process. So things like hearsay, right, don't apply.
Hearsay laws don't,
Yeah.
or the ban on hearsay does not apply.
For example, in the case of our trial, the mayor came forward with a lawyer, and the lawyer started popping up and doing objection, blah, blah, blah type of thing. And I was the one, the people that did the constitutional stuff to basically go there and say, first of all, say, you will sit down, right? No, you will stop right now and you will sit down, you will shut up, and you will listen. You need to understand that it is a misdemeanor to interfere with the legislative process. You are interfering with the legislative process. And we have the power in the charter, and I had the thing, I read the charter, to punish you. The jail is right next door. The next time you open your mouth and say a word, you'll be found in contempt, and the political officers will remove you to the judge, and basically, because we're also the judge and we're the jury. So if you
that's really pretty cool. That's a cool way to have a trial, at least if you're on the right side.
Understand that you are not permitted, you are not an elected official, you're not part of this trial. And if we want you to talk, we'll ask you, but you may not do all this stuff. And said, secondly, stop all this law stuff. I don't know whether your law professor failed to explain to you or not, but all this stuff of Supreme Court precedents, all this sort of thing, do not apply to the legislative branch, right? Executive orders don't apply to the legislative branch, right? So we can do stuff, and it doesn't matter that we heard someone say the mayor did this. We are the ones to decide if that evidence is admissible, and we're the ones that decide whether the person is guilty. We're the judge and the jury.
Wow.
So understand it means in the case of if the Senate does try Trump on the impeachment charges, that the Senate could decide on its rules that no Democrat is allowed to speak, no evidence is allowed to be given, and they can give the House delegation 5 minutes to say their spiel, hold a trial, and vote accordingly. I mean, they can do it where they want to, right? The Senate can set its own rules. And you can't sit there and appeal to the Supreme Court or so forth. So all the people saying, it's unfair and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, the Senate can do what it wants to. It sets its own rules. Mitch McConnell, as leader, has great power. The only way he could be challenged is if the majority of the senators choose to challenge him. But right. Mitch McConnell is actually smart enough to know that if he was trying to do something that he didn't have the backing of his party, he wouldn't do it, right? So if they have a Senate trial, it'll be because Mitch McConnell might decide to consult with the other party on a few things, but they'll set up the rules as they see deemed necessary. And it'll happen according to Senate rules. You may not like it. You may think it's unfair, but it's entirely proper within the Senate to do that. But it's also probably proper for the House to sit on that impeachment status. Nancy Pelosi could refuse to name the delegation and refuse to deliver the articles to the Senate until the last day of the legislature. She could wait until January, it's like the last sitting day of this current House, and then transmit it.
A quick question. So is there a good reason why whoever's sitting in on the impeachment, whether it be 3 people deciding about a mayor or the House the Senate, is there a reason they have so much free reign compared to a judge on a judicial case? Is there like a good reason for this?
I mean, it is about should this person hold office. So it means that if the reason why the person should hold office is they're high as a kite, drunk, and fail to show up for most of the meetings.
That's not true. Who said that?
You could have that as an article of impeachment. We had in one of our articles conduct unbecoming the mayor.
Right.
Nothing illegal for the mayor being a jerk. She was. I will say jerk because this is a family-friendly show.
Not really.
But there are other words that are even more.
Who the fuck said it was family-friendly?
So understand that this notion of the articles being somehow a crime is not a judicial process. Right. It is a legislative process. So again, subcommittee decides, I think we should have article of impeachment. They convince the leadership to form a committee to draft articles of impeachment. The article is a bill brought forward to the House under privilege. A majority of the House votes in favor of the article of impeachment. Then the committee for the prosecution is organized. It is sent to the other house, that is the Senate. They elect to receive that thing. They then hold a trial under their rules. The House members, the prosecutors, are allowed to present their evidence. They're allowed to bring in any evidence they wish. They're allowed to subpoena who they want to. They're allowed to consider any other items. But the issue is convict or not convict based upon article of impeachment and any other evidence brought before on the trial, where it is a legislative trial, and court precedents don't matter. And then they've had to, in the case of the Clinton's trial, tell Rehnquist, sorry, your branch doesn't tell our branch what to do. The only thing that Rehnquist can do as Chief Justice is basically be the presiding officer to do the formal stuff, right? But they could decide, it's the Senate majority that decides what is considered proper and how the trial is going to be done. And it's the Senate that then votes to convict or not convict. So the Senate is both the judge and the jury, according to Senate rules, and it becomes entirely political. So it's possible that a committee could sit there and say, this office holder has bad shoes and bad hair. And then they form an articles of
well, that is objectively true
by the majority. Then the prosecutors come in and set the trial date. And in the case of unicameral, it's the same people, but in bicameral, it's the other party, has a trial where they consider not only the hair and the shoes, but the jackets and how they don't match. And they say, yes, this person has bad hairstyle. Unlike mine, like mine.
This has really been pretty personal most of the night, Landon, and I really don't appreciate it, but okay.
And then they vote to convict, at which point the person's no longer in office. Right?
Well, so we're going to need to get going.
Well, that's sort of the bit of the deal, but a little bit of stuff there. So what might happen? Watch to see if and when the House forms the committee, the prosecution committee, and when and if they transmit that to the Senate.
Okay.
Meanwhile, the Senate has negotiations going on, knowing this potential trial is coming over. So the majority leader and the minority leader are trying to come up with some agreements, general agreements over how such a trial might be done. And by the way, the House can turn around and impeach Trump on other matters. So they could decide, we're going to wait until the courts rule on tax returns and then consider articles of impeachment on tax evasion. And they can add to the thing. You can be impeached more than once. But at some point, the prosecution committee is formed, the delegation go over to the Senate. Now, the Senate can refuse to admit them. That would be kind of unusual, but they could. But once they do it, they have a trial. The Senate could decide only people of this party can speak. The people have 5 minutes to say something while we go la 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 and ignore them and immediately vote and find the person not guilty. I mean, you can be just as sham on the other side as well. Right? It's not no guarantee.
Do you think she's going to, so just a sort of a part, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think she's going to sit on him? Do you think that she's going to transmit them? And do you think there's any shot of him being successfully removed from office by this process?
If I read the political process in the Senate, it would largely go along party lines. I believe it would not be surprising if there was one or two Democratic senators that voted to not convict.
Oh, okay. Yep. Okay.
Now, people say, oh, there's 35 people, so forth. No, it's a political process, right? And so now a calculus could be made where you say, if the trial occurred after Senate primaries, then the senators who
she could wait until the primaries are done and the ones who are up for a challenge are clear for 6 years.
Or for 6 years, or clear for the general election, right? So you could have a situation where a senator decides to pretend to be party line during the primary. They then win the primary and then vote along the line of what their state wants them to do. Or other things. We could do deal breaking. You could sit there and say, hey, Senator, if you vote to convict, I'll vote for your bill on wheat futures or whatever the thing is, right? All horse trading is fair game in the Senate, right? So one calculus is that if they hold a vote in secret, which the Senate can do, you might have a different outcome than if it's done publicly. So you better believe that the current Senate leadership would think very carefully about allowing a secret ballot on a trial to occur.
We just actually got that question: what would happen if? And somebody had asked.
Probably, I'd imagine the vote would be very different in an anonymous vote versus public.
I think so. I agree.
Again, have senators sit there and say, you know, that bill that you want to give federal aid to forestry people and create this national park in your state. Well, I would be willing to vote for it if you turn around and vote this way on impeachment. That happens in other bills. This is just another procedure. It's a political process. That's fair game. There's nothing illegal about that.
Wow.
Now, people will do that in secret because the president of a field day, but you better believe politicians. I mean, that's what we did. The joke at City Hall was office politics was the thing we did. It didn't get office politics and get interfere with what we did. It is what we did.
Right.
So now, when you're actually convicted, technically at that point, you are removed from office with the date of impeachment. In this particular case, the staff was already packing up the person's belongings in her office, and so I would imagine that if a sitting president were impeached and then convicted, that the Secret Service would be like moving the person out and removing the person holding a football would no longer take orders and so forth, and the line of succession would occur. Right. So at that point, what would happen if Trump were somehow convicted by the Senate, Pence would become president by virtue of succession. There would be a informal swearing-in ceremony where the Chief Justice would go to his dwelling and they'd swear it, and then they'd have a press thing. So by the way, when the president swears the oath of office, just like when I swore my oath of office, out in public, that's a ceremony. The person's already done it in private, right? You swear the oath in private, you become.
And then they have the ceremony on the
makes sense.
On the Capitol Hill. So we did the oath of office stuff. Now, why was I able to know about this process for giving the mayor? The answer was simple. Prior to holding office, I wanted to know what the oath was, right? I would have memorized it, and so I would not have had loud Rehnquist like Obama did to flub the oath of office. I knew the oath of office, and they said, but don't worry, you just repeat after me. And I said, but I want to know what it means. So I learned, in fact, that the oath of office included upholding the city charter. So guess what I did? I read the city charter. I was probably
you're pretty old-fashioned, but okay.
I read it. So when it came time to say we got to get rid of this mayor, I said it's very simple. Article 5 was, Section 506 of the charter says da 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 da. And they're like, you know that? Yeah. Didn't you read it? I mean, that's the oath you swore. I was that weird nutbag that had the U.S. Constitution, the state constitution in my dais desk to refer to them because I took the oath of office seriously. But what can I say?
All right. Well, we are going to need to get going. Thank you very much for joining us again, Landon. We really appreciate it. And I think there was a lot of people who really appreciated knowing the details much deeper. I think I had one more comment I was going to make, but I've kind of spaced what it was.
I would say that those people who are going to join us in Discord.
That was it.
Yes.
That was it. We're going straight to Discord. So there are plenty of people, and we've had a few I could listen to Landon, talk all day. And as much as I would very much like to continue to rack up the YouTube hours, we are going to need to get moving. We don't get the YouTube hours on Discord, but he will be on our Discord. We're gonna chain him there so he stops by more often. He's a member. He's too busy with Red Eye. apparently, because I have 2 eyeballs, I'm okay. I'm, he can't go near me. But so he'll be on our Discord. We're going to drop that, I think, one more time in the live chat. And then anyone who wants to come on over and chat with him and ask him questions, it'll be on the voice chat so people can talk to him. And he's just obviously, oh my God, rich. Oh, wow. So,
and I do have some breaking news before we go, by the way.
Oh, please.
Yes.
What's the breaking news? We have to do a show on this?
We might. Apparently, the United States has just entered a fair trade deal with Wakanda.
Yes, that was kind of funny. But by the way, just like I was extremely critical of Tulsi Gabbard displaying an act of political cowardice in voting present. There was a member of our city council who announced they were going to abstain because they didn't want to be tarnished with the process of impeachment.
Oh my God.
That person was a political coward, and I lit into that person. I tore that person a new political hole, right? Just like I said, I would just respect Tulsi if she voted no or yes. I might have disagreed or agreed depending on how you voted, but to vote present was an act of political cowardice that I think Tulsi should be held accountable for. Vote yes or vote no, because it's one of those things like deciding to declare war and sit there and say, well, I'm going to vote president because I don't want to be tarnished with this. Like,
I don't want to. Oh my God. Yeah.
So
we have a.
Tulsi, if you are hearing this, and you,
there's no way she's watching our show.
No, she's a regular. But yeah.
Right.
So
vote yes or vote no. Don't abstain. Do your duty. Right. Come on. Sorry.
All right. Well, thank you again. We'll be in the Discord probably in less than 5 minutes. We look forward to seeing you all there. And oh my God, we're with Wakanda now. Well, I suppose we could have done worse.
And do support people with Patreon and other good stuff. So,
see you later, people.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. It ain't over. Last night, my host, or I'd like to call him the shill, was caught hawking his wares last night on In Time, of all places. Right here on In Time. And I'm not going to put up with it. And you, the audience, you shouldn't put up with that either. So what are we going to do about it? How do we punish him? Well, there's only one way to punish him. Go right now to the In Time merch store linked in the description and get the Ansgar Odinson mug on a mug. Because only by a mug on a mug outselling a shill on the mug can we tell Nick $400 Soutter that we will not put up with his corporate shilling on In Time. It's the only way. Do the right thing. Do the right thing.